Hey, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we're going to call this Loving the End. Now, I'm a professional educator, so that means we're going to do some things that are going to require some participation. So we're going to start with one right here. We're going to play a game called Hey, That's Me, or Yeah, That's Me. Yes, that's me, however you want to think about it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show a couple of things, and if that's you, you stand up and you say, hey, that's me. So we're going to try one just real quick. So, if you're able to stand up, I'm going to ask you to do that. So let's do a demo one. I am at CreativeMornings. Y'all are a lot quicker than my high schoolers when they do this stuff. So, all right. So here we go. So I love the process of choosing and eating a delicious meal. Some of y'all didn't stand up. So do you just eat whatever? Like, what do you? All right. I clap at the end of a movie when I'm in the movie theater. Some of y'all I know, and I really am like. Now, I was talking to my wife about doing this, and she was like, you should do people who clap when the plane lands. Why do people do that? The pilot can't hear you. All right. I want the best things in my life to last forever. Yeah. That's all of us probably, but the reality is that it doesn't work that way, even though we wished it would. So we're going to talk about end. Now, I'm going to define it in a second. But before I do that, I want to talk about something that's important because I am going to talk about race today. And as an educator, one of the things that I make sure that I do when I talk about race is that I set that in front and I talk about what that means. These are 4 agreements of courageous conversation. Anybody familiar with Courageous Conversations About Race by Glenn Singleton? Yeah, cool. I'm glad there's a couple of y'all in here. It's more applicable to schools, but anywhere that you are where you're talking about race, you got to set some agreements about what that means before you start talking about it, because that is a way to keep people accountable. It's not a way to make people feel bad, but it's a way to say, this is what we're talking about, this is what we mean, and this is what we're going to do. So the first one is stay engaged. So for me, when I get to that point, I'm going to stay in that point, and I'm going to talk about it authentically, although it's going to make me kind of want to get out of here. But I'm going to stay engaged in that. The second one is I'm going to speak my truth. So speak your truth when you talk about race. I want this to be heard. I'm not talking on behalf of anybody else other than me. So when I talk about race, I'm not talking about all black people. I'm talking about Mark Williams. So experience discomfort. I think sometimes people think maybe, at least I've had this experience, people think I'm comfortable with talking about race and it doesn't bother me at all. I'm comfortable enough to talk about it, but it's also uncomfortable because this is a conversation that multiple generations of my family have been engaged in. And sometimes when I stop and think about the fact that I'm dealing with stuff that my parents dealt with, that their parents dealt with, that their parents dealt with, and so on, that's uncomfortable. And it irritates me and it makes me upset. So I am going to be uncomfortable, but I know that's going to happen. And then the last one is expect and accept non-closure. What that means is we're not going to solve the problem of racism in this conversation. You probably won't solve it in one conversation wherever you are. You'll be lucky if you solve it while you're alive. That's the reality of the situation. We should never go into it and think it's going to wrap it all up right here. So when you see initiatives or you see programs, do not lie to yourself and tell yourself that that's going to fix it. It probably won't, but it's easier if you just accept that on the front end. So I wanted to get that out of the way. We're not going to talk about race right away, but I wanted to make sure everybody heard that, okay? All right. So the end. When I found out what the theme was, I actually cheated. One of my friends sent me the theme before Ryan talked to me about it. And so, thanks, Molly. And when it said end, honestly, the first thing I thought about was death. Now, I don't know if anybody else does that. When they think about the end, maybe it's just morbid. But I thought about dying because that was my immediate thing to go to for whatever reason. But then when I stepped back and I looked, just did a quick Google search. I did my Googles on end. I didn't cite it, which is a faux pas, but there's 2 ways that we talk about the end. There's a noun and a verb. So the noun is a final part of something, or the furthest or most extreme part or point, or a goal or result that one seeks to achieve. That can be it in noun form. Now, as a verb, it's to finish something, to bring it to the final point, or reach a final point, or perform a final act. And so one thing I want everybody to think about while we go through this is how do those definitions challenge what you may have thought about the end before you walked in the room? Because I don't know what everybody thought the end meant, and it meant different things to everybody probably. But while we're in this space, these are the definitions that I'm working with. So I want you to keep these in mind, but I also want you to attach them. What did I think about end before I walked in here today? Okay? All right. So next thing. This is an Alpha and Omega. It's from Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, España. I put that up there because it's Spain. But a friend of mine that I work with, her name is Stephanie. She went to Spain with some students this summer with a bunch of other educators, and they brought me back a souvenir. And she told me that they were thinking about me specifically when they were looking at things like what would be something that Mr. Williams would like. And I wear pins when I wear a cardigan to work. Usually they have something on them, they say something, or they're just cool. I get a lot of my pins from Etsy, if you're a pin person. So this one in particular, Steph gave it to me, and she said, I'm not going to tell you what it means, so you got to go look it up. And I'm like, okay, all right. And it was summertime, so I did a whole bunch of other stuff. And then when I started thinking about this, I'm like, let me go back and look at this and see what it means. I had no idea what it was. And while I was Googling it, it was kind of hard to figure out what this actually is and what it's supposed to mean. But what I figured out is that this is an Alpha and Omega. Now, if you can turn your head all the way upside down, you'll notice that it's the same. It's the same on both ends. Now, she didn't know I was talking about the end at all when she got this for me. But I'm in a point in my life where I'm starting to recognize the timing of things, and that if things happen in my life, it's because they're supposed to, and it's not necessarily because that's how I wanted it to happen. It's just it showed up that way, and I need to respond to that. There's a good book about that I like to read, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, I think is how you pronounce his name. It's about personal legend journeys and about omens, and when you see different things, what do they mean? How do you respond to them? So children that are in the room, that's a book y'all need to read. Don't be like me and wait until you're 30-something to read a book that you should have read when you were 10. So the Alpha and Omega in Christian belief, it's the end, the beginning and the end, and usually it's talking about Jesus. But what somebody said online about this is that they used the circle to represent this. So a circle, every point on the circle is the beginning, and it's also the end at the same time. So when you take a pencil and you go around in a circle, y'all remember doing that? Dang, did none of y'all didn't go to school? Y'all didn't draw no circles? Like what kind of? Your math teachers are like, yeah, we did that. So you go around. And you go, it's a starting and an ending at the same time. So what somebody theorized is that although it is an alpha and omega, technically it's an alpha, and it's an omega and an omega at the same time. And really, basically the point is every ending is a beginning. And so that is something that I wanted to think about while I was doing this. Honestly, this process, thank you to Ryan for having me here and everybody else. This, even thinking about these things has changed who I feel like I am, because what it made me realize is that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the endings of things, and I've been missing the beginnings of things that were happening. And so I was stressed out about this, and it was because I wanted it to end, or there was a thing that ended and I didn't want it to end. And what I had been missing is that there were things that were starting at the same time. And so one of the things that happened, this is my family right here. So that's my mom and dad in the middle. Now, a lot of y'all swear I look just like my dad. Look. I look like a perfect mixture of both of them. I think people say that because I'm a man and we both are bald now, and so, but it's my mom and dad in the middle. This is May 31st, 1980. So it's St. Paul Baptist Church in Gary, Indiana. So on the side with my mom, that's my grandmother and that's my grandfather. And then on the side with my dad is my grandmother and my grandfather. And so both of my grandfathers are now deceased. So my mom's dad died in 2008, and my grandfather, Johnny Williams, died this year in January. And he died right up the road here at, I don't know what they use. It's a hospital. It washes over you after a while. But I was there in the room with him for the last couple of hours of his life. And for the last few minutes, I held onto his right hand. And in that moment, it was difficult, for sure. And I had never done that before, but I was there because my mom was like, we can't let him be by himself. And my dad's family, they're like just not emotionally equipped to be there in those moments. And I love my dad, but he he shouldn't have been there, and he wasn't. So I was there, and what I was realizing in those moments, we were talking the last couple of hours, and when people are getting ready to die, if you know that they are about to die, all these conversations start about who they were and like what they meant to somebody and what kind of father were they and what kind of man or what kind of woman or what kind of husband or wife or whatever they were to somebody. Everybody's got a story about who they were. And in that moment, it made me think at some point, people are going to talk about me the same way. And I know sometimes we have a habit of telling each other, oh, you shouldn't really care what other people think, or you should do your own thing, don't worry about that. Well, the reality is you should do your own thing, but people do get to have an idea about who you are. And they do get to think about who you are. Everybody in here, whoever you're around, they have an idea about who you are. And they make that off of what they see from you, what they know from you. And so in this moment, I kind of zoned out because my mom was talking and like I wasn't really paying attention to what she was saying after a while because I was in my own head. And it made me think like I need to think about all my relationships with everybody and like what do they mean and are they what I want them to be? Because when this happens to me, what will they say about me? What do I want them to say? What do I hope they will say? And so I had to think about my marriage, and I had to think about my son, Walter, who is 4. I had to think about, am I the dad that I want him to talk about? Am I the husband that my wife would want to represent when she talks about me in front of her friends? Or would she be ashamed to talk about me? Would she find a way to not talk about me? Would my parents be proud of me? Would my sister be proud of me? My students, that was really where it kicked in. So kids that are in the room, I want y'all to make sure y'all hear this. You are allowed to have an idea about what your teachers, like who they are as people. And I know y'all do that. Y'all do it as fast as we come up with something. Y'all do that. Y'all walk in. It's the first day is coming up for a lot of y'all, so y'all going like, all right, I got my pencils. Okay, there's this person. All right. And you're like, all right, cool. I'm like, where do I sit? If you got a cool teacher, they tell you sit wherever you want to sit. You know, shout out to no seating chart. You just come on in and sit down. And so that first day, and this is the hardest part about teaching. I remember my first year teaching at School 67 over on the west side in Hallville. And I remember walking in and being like, okay, these kids, I don't like, what are they going to think? So I think I'm cool, you know, I'm standing at the door. And none of them thought I was cool, and they walked right past me. But one of the things that I think about, like my students, I've learned that I mean a bunch of things to them, and I may not ever know unless I check in with them on that. And so I had some students in particular this year that just had some really rough times. And one in particular was new. She was a senior. She moved in. And there was a time in the fall where she just it was a rough day, and she ended up staying in my room and like just having a kind of like, you could call it a meltdown, but counselor shows up. I'm like, she don't want anybody to talk to you in here. It's cool. She got it. And so that moment passed me by, but when my grandfather was dying, I started to think about all of my student relationships, and I wondered, like, who am I to them, and who do I want to be to them? And what I did not know is that student in particular had chosen me as a dad. So her father figures is just not great. And so what I didn't know is that me being who I was like replacing them in a way. And she's somebody I consider a child at this point now, but I didn't really know that while it was happening. But in that moment, as Grandpa Johnny was getting ready to say peace to the rest of us, I started to think about where was my life going from here after that, because I've lived my life with him, and now my life is without him, but it's a beginning of something. And so that's what I thought about in that moment. So it goes back to this. Every ending is a beginning. I'm going to keep doing that. This is a teaching strategy to keep coming back. So here's the part where we're going to talk about race. So y'all ready for this? Okay, I hope so, because you live in Indianapolis. We got some race things we need to talk about around here too, but not today, but we're going to get into it at some point. All right. So this is in Montgomery, Alabama. Anybody familiar with the Legacy Museum and the Memorial for National Peace and Justice? All right. If you haven't been, here's my commitment. If people in Indianapolis want to go, we find a day when we can go, I will go with y'all. I will walk with y'all. I do not think you should go without somebody that went after going by myself. And I went, and nobody was with me. But I think you should have somebody go with you, because what you're going to see when you get there is going to blow you away. So if you look, I want to point this out. I didn't take any pictures in the Legacy Museum because I got there late and I didn't have a lot of time. But if you look at the picture at the top, that's actually a picture of a public lynching. And that's on the front-facing part of the building. So if you rode down the street, you can see that. The Equal Justice Initiative is real serious about all of this, and they put it in your face, and they don't give you any time to they're not protecting any feelings when you go to these things. They're talking about the truth. The whole point is to turn and face the reality of racial inequality and systemic racism and white supremacy in America, and they put it right on you. Now, in that space there, it's from enslavement to mass incarceration is the whole title. So you start, when the transatlantic slave trade begins all the way up to now, talking about mass incarceration. Even some of the stuff that's going on at our borders now is mentioned in some of this. Internment camps, any kind of situation where people are being taken from where they're supposed to be and confined somewhere else in a harsh manner. They talk about all of that. But in the space, that physical space is actually a former slave pen in Montgomery, Alabama. So you're in a place where people were once held, waiting to be sent somewhere else and have their families broken up and all of the different things that went on. And they did that on purpose. because Montgomery, Alabama was actually like the center of the South at the time, leading up to the Civil War, which, we don't really talk about it too much. A lot of people think of Montgomery, and maybe they know that that's where Dr. King started, where he had his first church. Maybe they know that's where Rosa Parks got on the bus. But one of the things I learned, and I didn't include it, but I learned that her bus stop is right where, I think it's Court Square is the name of it, and that was also a slave market at one point in time. So I think about black people that lived in Montgomery, Alabama. You're in a place where you once would have been a slave, and like there's stuff, there's still artifacts. You go to the state capitol, there's Confederate monuments and memorials. I saw them with my own eyes. It's kind of hard to believe that in a country that claims to be progressive and a superpower, we are still allowing people who tried to separate the country to protect slavery. To have a monument anywhere in the country is absurd. But when you see it, it's kind of reinforcing. Even for me, I feel like I'm with it. But for me, it was like to let me know, like, hey, this is what we really think of you, because we still got this to show you. So when I went to the Memorial for Peace and Justice, I was walking up the sidewalk, and a guy, probably my dad's age, he was walking down the sidewalk. Now, brothers that's in the room, there's a couple of us in here, so right on. You can laugh, it's fine. We know, usually a few of us. One of the things that I love about black men, though, is when we see each other, if we don't know you, we still speak to you. So, like, we'll walk past, what's going on, brother? How you doing? All right. Right on. Peace, peace. So I thought he was just going to give me that. No, he looked at me and said, this is about to be hard. And then he kind of had like a chuckle. I'm like, okay, I just got out of the car. I drove there from Indianapolis, so I've been in a car for 8 hours. I then drove through all parts of the South. My mom blowing me up. You all right? You okay? Make sure you don't stop nowhere. All that. Black people might in here know what I mean when we, so the Green Book, I'm not going to watch it because it's trash and it's not really the whole story. But that is real, though. I know how many of you that are black in the room remember your ancestors or your elders telling you about where to stop, when to stop, how to stop. Yep, we leave at 3 o'clock in the morning so that by the time we need to stop, the sun is up. And we only stop in major cities. We're not stopping in towns that we can't pronounce or don't know nobody in. That's real. For me, I still ride around Indiana, and there's places I'm not stopping. So from here to Richmond, I might stop in Richmond. From here to Terre Haute, I might stop in Terre Haute. From here to Bloomington, I might stop in Bloomington. From here to Fort Wayne, I'm stopping in Fort Wayne probably. I'm not stopping and like, oh, this is cool, they got gas. No, I don't do that. And so I had got there, and he told me that, and I knew it was going to be rough. So it had just opened last year. So I was, within the first 3 months, I was there in July. And this is one of the first things you see when you get there. This is like you walk in, I'll never forget it. You walk in, there's some stuff over here. You walk past security. You get in there, and then bam, big sculpture. And this is depicting a separation of family. So they're all in chains, and you see in bondage. And that's what you see like 5 minutes in. And people kind of crowd around it. And I'm going to be honest with you, it felt bad taking a picture of this because it's life-size. And so in a way, it made me feel like there were real people there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep walking. And on the wall, there's all this information about what you're about to see. But if you look back in that corner, I don't know if this has a pointer, but you look back in there, I made it about that far, and then I had to sit down. And I cried harder than I had cried in probably years. And I hadn't even really seen anything yet. I had saw that, and I read some information, and that was it. And where this is, it's in a neighborhood, so it's kind of odd how they situated it. But there's houses that are nearby. It almost feels like you went to a park. But then when you get there, the structure is huge, and it's designed to feel like it's hanging over you anyway, which is intentional. But before I even got to that, I was done because I knew what I was getting ready to go through. But I thought I knew. So before I got there, I went through all the counties. It's kind of tough to see, but I went through all the counties where I knew I had family in the South. And what I did is I looked for the counties. So they have it all listed by county, and for places that don't have a bunch of counties, it's by state. So Indiana is represented in this memorial because there have been lynchings in Indiana, and one of the most famous pictures is in Marion, Indiana. And they almost got 3 people, but he got away, and they didn't get him, but there's 2. And so you will see Indiana when you go there, but Copiah County, Mississippi is where Hazelhurst, Mississippi is. So my grandfather that just passed is from Hazelhurst, Mississippi. His last name is Williams, and if you can see that, there's a Lewis Williams on this. Now, I don't know for sure, but I know Hazelhurst is real small. There are not a lot of families. Black people have been there for a long time. They were once held as slaves, and then they were freed, and lynching in the South was something that people did almost just whenever they felt like it. So if, there's some stuff that I've done in my life that when I read all the plaques about people who were lynched, like I've done some of those things that people got lynched about. So like one of them is like talking back to a white man, or making too much money, or trying to vote, or trying to register people to vote, or just a simple argument. These are things that people were abducted, and all kinds of things happened to them. But when I saw Lewis Williams, I had already cried once, and then I cried again. And it's, for me, it's even hard to talk about. It would be easier if I knew, but I don't know. And so I wondered, like, there aren't that many Williamses in Hazelhurst or in Copiah County. It ain't that big. And what really made it even worse, I was talking to my grandmother after Grandpa Johnny died, and she was giving me some information about him that he had shared with her that I had never heard. So his father, he didn't grow up with his real father, and I always thought it was just a simple domestic thing. But my grandfather believed that his father had to leave Hazelhurst because he was going to get lynched, so he left. And they ended up reconnecting later on in life. He also told my grandmother that he had a cousin that was lynched at one point in time. And I know sometimes we hear those stories and we want to tell ourselves, well, maybe they got it wrong. I don't know who would make that up. So my grandfather is dead now, so I don't get to ask him any of these questions, and I kind of wouldn't have asked anyway. But this, after I found that out, this is when it got me for real. And so the ending that happened here is I had been hip to a lot of stuff I thought. But in this moment, it made me realize I didn't know everything I needed to know. I had not made a real hard turn and looked at what really had gone on in America to people who are African American or descendants of the African diaspora. I didn't really get it until I stood there and I looked. That's a place that I know. That's a name that I recognize. That could be somebody that's my kin. And what does that mean to me? And so that is an ending that I needed in the beginning. So since I've been back up here, everything that I thought about race after going to see this changed because of this part as well. And so I'm going to read this because this is towards the end of, like, you walk around and it's designed kind of in a geometric shape, but when you get to the lowest point, there's this poem. And so it's for the hanged and beaten, for the shot, drowned, and burned, for the tortured, tormented, and terrorized, for those abandoned by the rule of law, we will remember, with hope because hopelessness is the enemy of justice, with courage because peace requires bravery, with persistence because justice is a constant struggle, with faith because we shall overcome. And so, again, this is cry number 3. So I got there, and I did a lot of crying there, which I'm willing to admit. Now, I know I grew up in an environment where men weren't really admitting that they were crying too much, but my son was born, and I was there, and I've been crying and stuff ever since, honestly. Yeah, so nobody told me that. They were like, well, wait till they start talking back. Nobody told me, like, nobody was like, hey, wait till you cry about everything, because you're in touch with your emotions in a different way, or at least that's my story. But when I looked at this, this was really hard, and the sun was I thought it was a really nice picture. And the hard part about this is when you look at it, though, all those things that are hanging above you are different counties to tell you people's names and where they were lynched at. And so in the middle of this, you're reading this poem that's talking about hope and it's talking about justice, and at the same time, you got all these reminders, and they hang over your head, and it makes you feel real small while you're there. And it was there was no way that I knew right then, there's no way I can leave here and be the same person when I get back to whatever I'm supposed to be doing. And so if you follow me on Instagram or on Twitter, you'll notice I don't really have no problems talking about stuff that went on in America because I let people argue with the facts. You can argue with me if you want to, but this is stuff that happened. We can verify it. I teach that in my class. You talk about the facts, and you let people do what they want to do with them, but they're facts. These are things that can be proven. We know they went on. They happened. We can document them. And so when I came back, my commitment was that I was, number one, going to let people know that I went there. Number two, I was going to tell people they need to go. And number three, I was going to talk about race in a very transparent way and talk about its effects. Now, here's the thing, though. I love Indianapolis. But there are a lot of people in this room that I know do a lot of cool stuff and have a lot of influence. We're going to have to start talking about race for real in this city at some point, like now. I know there are some initiatives in play, but I know sometimes with initiatives, people step back and say, well, they're doing that, so I don't have to do that. They got it. Racism and systematic racism, challenging white supremacy, is something that everybody needs to be a part of. And if you're not a part of it, you're a part of the problem. And I'm not asking you to go out and burn up your whole relationships with everybody just to tell them about the truth. But you're going to have to go and figure out what makes the most sense for you, where you have influence, and you need to start doing that. And that's not just on account of me. That's because your children need that, your neighbors need that, and the future of the city, if we're being honest, will depend upon that. when I was in my public law class for education, one of the major cases we talked about happened right here in Indianapolis. It was the story of de facto versus de jure segregation in IPS. I think it was like 1971. And I think Lugar might have been the mayor. Was it Lugar that was the mayor? Somebody was the mayor at the time. That's what forced all the busing. Now, I don't know if y'all realize busing just stopped a couple, like 3 or 4 years ago. Basically what they figured out is that IPS was segregating their schools not through policy but through practice. And so at this time, I think Shortridge and Attucks were the major high schools that were brought into question. But what they figured out is by the way that they were working policies, they had created a segregated school environment, and it became a federal lawsuit, and that's why the busing needed to happen. Now, I love IPS. I used to work for IPS. I worked in a couple other different school districts, and I think Indianapolis still has the same problem of being segregated by policy, not necessarily by law. And so that is not okay. And so when we think about developing the core of our city, I want everybody in here to remember we cannot let it go back to an environment where it's segregated any more than it already is. It's a bad thing when we can talk about a neighborhood and say, oh, well, you know, it's all black and it's been like that forever, or it's all white and it's been like that forever. Or when we go into neighborhoods, it used to be, and they're like, well, it used to be a lot of black people that lived over here. It used to be a lot of, you know, Hispanic people or whoever that lived there. And because of development, we're moving people out. These are things we have to be intentional about, though, y'all. This is not something that is just going to happen. And so when I was there in Montgomery, Alabama, that was the beginning of my journey to know more about myself. So I studied more history in the South and more history in general as race in America. And I just brought that back with me, and I continue to do that work. It's got me in a little bit of a pickle sometimes. I've been called in the office a couple times about some of the stuff that I tweeted for just telling the truth. Apparently, it's not okay to say that the sitting president is an agent of white supremacy on Twitter when you're a teacher, but I mean, it's true. So, you know, it's true. So, and I don't want anybody to interpret racism as a political thing. I just want to throw that in there. Racism is wrong because it's wrong. It really don't matter who's doing it, okay? All right. So every ending has a beginning. Now, for the part a lot of people saw on Twitter, they're like, oh, we're going to talk about music today. Yeah, we're going to talk about music. But we have some serious stuff to get through first. Now, all right, here's what we're going to do. Everybody ready? Everybody ready? Okay, I look a little sleepy. Okay. All right, here's the thing. We're going to turn and talk. Anybody familiar with turn and talk? We got some teachers in the room. Check it. Oh, some kids in the room. Now, you know what? She raised her hand like, yep. Like, it's okay. I understand. Some students they don't want to do the turn and talk, and some of y'all don't want to do it either, but we're going to do it today. So turn and talk is exactly what I say it is. You turn and you talk to somebody. For those of you that want to get up and wander, some of y'all are in here, my friends. I know how y'all are. Y'all like social. Y'all want to get up and talk to everybody. Just turn and talk. Yep, you. At least, I'm sorry. I love you, though. So turn and talk. Here's the thing. When I was doing this, I was thinking about the end of music. Musicians in the room. Musicians, all of us, you know how hard it is to end a song. Because you know if we don't get it right, people are like, dang, well, that kind of sucked. So the ending is super important. So I started to think about a bunch of different songs that end in a cool way, and we're going to play some examples. But I want you to turn and talk to somebody about a song that you love because of the way that it ends. And I'll give you, got a couple minutes, I think. Thank you, sir. All right, turn and talk. Man, y'all are good. This is like first day of school. It is never this good on the first day of school. I love these moments when people get to talk to each other. Hopefully you sat next to somebody you don't really know that well, so you got to learn something new. Now, before I go into mine, is there anybody that heard one that they're like, ooh, that's a good one? A song that, how that ends. You in the aisle? You got one? Okay, thanks. I'm not super hip to Bob Dylan, but I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to front. I trust you on that. Anybody have another one? Oh, by, what's that man's name? I think I have it. Yep. Yep. I got you. Oh, Bohemian Rhapsody. Nothing really matters. Isn't that how that is? Just you wait. Nothing really matters to me. One more.
Who's Loving You?
By, oh, yeah. He holds out that note at the end. Ooh, yeah. Just so we're transparent, I'm not going to talk about it too long, but I'm conflicted about Jackson 5, Michael Jackson music. I haven't played any since that documentary came out. I haven't played any at all on any gigs that I'm on because I just can't. So sorry. So if you're riding around listening to MJ still, you do what you do, but I ain't gonna be able to do it. So Okay, all right, here's one, and let's talk about this one. Okay, so everybody remember this? All right. Look at you, I knew somebody was gonna go, y'all so nasty. Woo! So funny. So anybody want to guess what song I'm gonna play from this album? How does it feel? The ending is fantastic. And that's the end of that song. It just ends right there in the middle of the chorus, which is really incredible. A small note about that song. He won a Grammy for that, but a lot of people think that song ruined his career because the video, if you remember that, I don't know if he was naked or not, but he looked like he was. And I remember seeing it on, 106 in Park was on, I think, back then on BET. And so I remember that like blew up bigger than the rest of the album. Now, for those of you that don't know this album, go ahead and put that in rotation when you leave because it's incredible. It's one of the best albums in probably the last 25 years. And I can say that confidently. And then the thing is, it overshadowed the album, and then he became a sex symbol. Well, the cover kind of set you up for that, bro. But apparently he wasn't really ready to deal with that, and he didn't like it, and he like retreated from stuff after they finished the tour and didn't put another album out for 15 years after that. So, but it's incredible, and you should check it out. All right, next one. Yeah, love it. Anybody want to guess what song it's gonna be? No, but that's a great one. God, that's a great one. No. I didn't go for beautiful ones because I thought people might be like, I don't know this one. This ain't Purple Rain. So what I did go with is, this is one of my favorite songs, mostly because of the video. All right, so it fins and it fades out. That keyboard solo is great, but he recorded it at half speed and then sped it back up. Just a little tidbit. But he could play it at full speed if he wanted to. So that's Prince. That's When Doves Cry, in case you needed to know what that is. I like the way that song ends just because he kind of stopped singing, and then the next 2 minutes or so is just Prince showing off, basically. And it ends with like another keyboard patch that goes up, and then it almost sounds like Baroque period, like, classical music, which kind of shows how dope Prince was on everything. So, all right, let's talk about the next one. How about this one? Anybody familiar with this? Cool, couple people. If you're not, this is another one you need to add. John Coltrane, arguably one of the greatest musicians ever, definitely one of the greatest people to ever play jazz music. This is one of his last really big-time heralded albums, and there's a part in it at the beginning, the end of the first song, and I'll just play it. So he goes on with A Love Supreme way out through it, which is odd because as he was not somebody who did any vocal jazz at all. So I remember the first time I heard this, and it got to that point. So right before that, he plays a motif of like 4 notes, 36 different times, and it starts like on a different note. Yeah, your face was like, really? Yes, he really does it. And then he recorded A Love Supreme. They say that he overdubbed it 19 different times. So there's 19 different vocal tracks for him saying that. And it's just a chant, and it's kind of a mantra. And if you listen to it, it will get you there. And I remember my 18, 19-year-old self, like, I thought I liked jazz. How many had that like teenage jazz period? Right, yeah. So like, which jazz album should I listen to? Somebody was like, A Love Supreme. I'm like, bet. So I bought it on Amazon. Back when there was like no such thing as Prime, it was like 7 days of shipping, and like you just sit around and like, all right, it'll be here. And it got delivered to my dorm room, and I remember popping that in and listening to it, and it got to the Love Supreme part, and it blew me away because I'm like, first off, why is he talking? But second off, what does A Love Supreme mean? And he explains it a little bit in the credits, but the song had to end that way in order to make the rest of the album make sense. Because without that chanting part, it's just called A Love Supreme, and it's kind of nebulous, like some jazz album titles can be. It's just like, what exactly is it supposed to be about? That's one of the last big things that he did before he passed, though. But that's a great album. If you're not, bless you, if you're not familiar with that, you should check that one out as well. All right, here's another one. Everybody familiar with this one? All right, cool. Another place you should go, Memphis, go to the Stax Museum, go to Sun Studios. What else is there? Go to the Lorraine Motel. Another place, we could talk for hours about the National Civil Rights Museum. But yeah, so you probably know what's going to happen. I heard that, I think, when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I remember being like, why is he whistling at the end of the song? And my mom was like, I don't know, because it sounded good. A story that I've heard, apparently from Steve Cropper, who helped him write the song. Steve Cropper was in Booker T and the MGs, a guitar player. Otis Redding was supposed to sing something there, say something, and he forgot it, so he whistled instead. The interesting thing about this tune is that Otis Redding didn't think it was done, but he died before he could go back and finish it. So the version that we get is incomplete in some ways, but it's an ending within an ending in some ways, and it's kind of interesting that it happened that way. All right, I have 2 more. Now, if you know me, you probably know one of them I'm going to have to talk about. Come on now. So if you know me, if you've ever been anywhere where I DJ, you know I like to play this song. Somebody said it. Oh, yeah, it's Love on Top, of course. It really needs no introduction because Beyonce is the queen mother of all things. I love that so much because really the church kid in me is like, oh, that's just a church thing to change keys at the end. Any church choir people, gospel church choir people, and you're doing those key changes and the director keep going and you're like, all right, man, all right. Like, I'm at the top of my range. I'm like, we still going and we still going. And I love that she did that. I'm convinced that song is great by itself, but I don't think it would be that great if she didn't end it that way. I think it has to end like that in order to make the rest of it make sense. She had to do something like that. And so that has become like a signature song, in my opinion, of hers, mostly just because of the ending. Now, when I'm at wedding receptions and stuff like that, everybody tries to sing it. And it's tragic. But I appreciate the attempt. Now, the last one that I have, this one is I Owe This to My Dad. Oh, some Parliament people in the room. I love that. So my dad, I grew up in an era where CDs started to blow up, and that meant compilation CDs started to be a thing, and my dad was like behind everything that was a compilation that he had on vinyl at one point in time. And so this was one of the songs. The song is Mothership Connection, so it's Star Child. And at the end, they go into a part that they sing Swing Down Sweet Chariot. Now, I'm going to play it, but before I play it, I want that song is about an ending in itself, right? Some people think it might be about Elijah and going up into heaven and being called up. Just in general, just the idea of being taken from somewhere to another place and being done with something and starting something new. And some people also think it might be an Underground Railroad reference and that swing down, sweet chariot, stop coming forth to carry me home. Like, you know, to come and rescue me from this situation. Now, in this song, in context, if you're familiar with Parliament, this is in the era where they're doing like a space opera, basically. And so all the albums are connected to each other. And so Mothership Connection, this is the first time you get Star Child as a character. So George Clinton's talking about Star Child. I'm here to reclaim the pyramids and like basically Messiah kind of thing. And then to throw this in at the end, I know people think about George Clinton and think, man, that dude is wild, he's crazy. But I think people dismiss the fact that he was very intentional about a lot of stuff that they did, and it was never on accident. And I bet if he was here, I could ask him. I'm sure he would probably say, yeah, we knew what we were doing when we did that. Because that concept, this comes out in like 1975. And in context, I think sometimes we look at the 70s and we think that like everything was cool, Vietnam's over, people trying to rebuild their lives. But I know black people still, and even in those moments, were still trying to get stuff to be better than it was. And I can only imagine when black people especially heard this, if they knew anything about the history of it, what they would have thought it might have meant. And it's so cool that it ends that way because it's some of the greatest like music that I've ever heard in my life. So I'm going to let the full part of the end of this play. So it's like 45 seconds or something like that, but it's so great. That's one of my favorite songs of all time. But that ending, I wish it just would have went on and on and on and on and on and on and on forever. But as a musician, I understand we got to get out of the tune at some point. And so we can go to the next record. So that's part of the beginning and the endings in that. And then the next thing, I just want to make some clarity. You may see me talk about existing the infinite. This came out of a conversation I had with a student. She was saying about, oh, this is weird how this is going to connect. She was saying how she didn't feel creative. And it was around finals time and she was struggling. And I was like, you got to exist in the infinite. Now, off the cuff, I just throwing stuff out there. And she was like, what does that mean? And I'm like... And I told her, I said, well, basically how I look at it is that creativity is infinite, and it just depends on where it is showing up. So as a musician and a bunch of different other things and a teacher and whatever, I try to be fair with myself and realize that my creativity is happening somewhere, and it's going to go through something. It's just my job to recognize where it's moving through and then move with it while it moves. So at one point in time, it was like making certain kinds of rap records. So you make those until you can't make them anymore. And then it like switched into like really caring about food a whole bunch. And then I cared about coffee a whole bunch. And then I cared about gardening and flowers and stuff like that. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that's my thing. But creativity is an unending and infinite process. And you have to exist in it. And when you do that, you start to recognize I can be creative all the time, anywhere, wherever I go. It just depends on, am I in tune with that in my own mind and in my own creative spirit? So that's what it means to exist in the infinite. And that is all that I have to say today.
All right. I told you guys that was going to be special. Please give it up again for Mark, Mr. Kinetik.